everybody. Welcome to a live stream. I'm just going to talk about topics that are in my mind, and hopefully it might help some people get a greater clarity of understanding of our world and our reality, and some tools perhaps for people to have a better mindset when they start to discover the nature of our reality, and also what we can do to change things. So I want to start off because it's quite difficult, because so many things interconnect and interrelate, and it's quite difficult for people when they're discovering into conspiracy theories, the Mandela effect, the event, the global consciousness awakening, to see the entire picture, how everything interrelates. So people tend to spend a lot of time looking at specific areas of interest and going down these what many people call rabbit holes. And just like the mainstream media, many of these videos about these rabbit holes are very fear-based, and or they generate anxiety in the people learning about them, which can be very difficult for people to get out of. And I was fortunate to meet friends who have helped me to have a better perspective and to get out of that anxiety, fear-based, hopeless kind of mindset quite early compared to most people. So today I want to start off by discussing, in my opinion and my understanding, what human rights are. You hear it all the time in the conspiracy world. People talk about, oh, that's against human rights, and these are our human rights, and they're being contravened by our governments, and etc, etc, etc. So what are human rights? Well, my understanding is human rights are really, they originated with religious law, especially in the Abrahamic religious basis. So they were inalienable human rights that were kind of dictated by God or Yahweh. But that doesn't really have anything to do with current legal human rights. So this is my understanding of the way it works. When you become a citizen of a country, then it is a contract between you as a citizen and the governance of that country, the state. And the contract will be, in exchange for your labour and the profits of your labour and your adherence to whatever the laws of that land are, the state agrees to give you certain rights as a citizen and expectations, and these will be protection from dangers and threats, a decent quality of education, housing, above a minimum level of basic human needs for survival. And these will vary depending on the country. So Western countries will agree to provide what is at that time considered an average standard of life, an average standard of lifestyle, in exchange for your labour and the profits of your labour and your adherence to the laws of the land. It's a contract. The crux of the matter is, we don't really get informed consent about signing this contract. This contract is signed on our behalf by our parents when we are very young. And many countries, that is a legal requirement. So like in the UK, it's a legal requirement as a citizen that you register your children with the state within a certain time period after birth. As a citizen, you have agreed, or as a citizen, the contract is you agree to abide by the laws of the land, and that is one of the laws. And that's a problem, because there's no informed consent, because you weren't given informed consent, and most people have very little understanding of this. They just go along with the law, and each generation they're tying their children into the same perpetual contract. That's not the same as human rights. You give up, effectively, your human rights, your what some people would call your God-given rights, as an independent sovereign being, when you're tied into that contract, whether that's voluntarily or not. So the problem that many countries have is that as part of their side of a contract, they agree to giving their citizens a certain standard of living. Now, this will mean that because our entire economies are based on this monetary structure and reliance on money, that their citizens have to have a certain minimum amount of money in order to achieve that average standard of living. Now, the problem is that standard changes over time. So as countries progress industrially and technologically and culturally, the expectations of their citizenry of what is an average or minimum standard of lifestyle, increases, it changes. So as the citizenry become more wealthy, that benchmark goes up in scale, and that costs more money. So the governments and people who rule these countries are in a bit of a bind, because money only has value if it's in limited supply. To get money the way the system works, then you exchange your labour for money. But there is only so many jobs. So, and the vast majority of jobs in the Western world do not pay enough for that person to meet that minimum standard of living that they expect. So we're in a situation where the governments and the states have to subsidise the majority of their workforce in order for them to be able to have that minimum expectation and standard of living. There are some jobs, far fewer, that will pay enough to independently achieve that standard of living, and there are a tiny minority that will pay over what is required. But the vast majority pay less than what is required. That's why there's so much talk about in the UK of minimum wage and a living wage and what the difference is and what it should be. And this is a major problem for the governance of states. How did they keep their citizens happy and content with their average standard of living and be able to meet that expectation economically? And this is going to be a perpetual problem. It's never going to go away, and it's never going to be met. We're never going to get to a state where every citizen has that minimum expected standard of living that is acceptable to everybody, because the economic system and the financial system is very restrictive and constrains and prevents that from ever happening. Because the way that productivity is driven within the system is there has to be a constant need and desire by the majority of people for more money. If all their needs are met, that desire goes away for a majority of people. So the desire to work longer hours and exchange more of their labour goes away. So it's a constant problem. And if everyone's needs are met, then that will also affect the value of the currency, because the value of a currency is largely based on a desire for more of that currency. So this is a self-limiting, self-feeding system that will never resolve these problems that we live in today. And this ties into population. Because if your citizenry is constantly reproducing more than they're dying, and your population numbers are constantly increasing within this model that we currently employ, that becomes an ever worsening issue and problem for the governance, because there are only a finite number of jobs. And the reason we have so many jobs that pay less than we require for a decent standard of living, an average minimum standard of living that we expect, is because there are a limited number of jobs, a limited number of labour hours required, and too many people within this system. So that's when you get a lot of this talk about, and it's true, there are factions who want to depopulate, who constantly want to depopulate. The only difference is how fast and how much, and how to do it. Because in order to preserve this model and this system, they have to do that. So they can't have a constantly exponentially increasing population. It will destabilise the whole system, and their wealth and their power is completely reliant upon the continuation of this same system. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is because there are local elections coming up in the UK. I recently got political pamphlets through the door for the Conservative Party. I know this is different from America and the UK. In the UK, the Conservatives, called the Tories, are, for many people, call them the nasty party, because they're very much into privatisation. And the opposing main party, the Labour Party, is more into nationalisation and socialism. Although over time the differences between them have got less and less and less. And I know many people who are all their lives they vote because, and I have for most of my life, I've always voted because, like everybody else, I believed that the only way to make fundamental change was to use your power to vote. The problem is it's never going to work. It's never going to make fundamental change. It will make change, but not fundamental change. It won't change the model of the system we're living in, because the political leaders only are political leaders because they don't challenge the system we live in, the monetary system that we use. Because it's very difficult, well, it's impossible really, to become a politically powerful person without funding by big business. Big business are only big business because they play within the rules of the game, the model we live in. So it's not in their interest to fund politicians who are talking about breaking down this system and having a new one. So they're not going to fund them. So it's a self-maintaining system that's tied into politics. So voting for the opposing party will make small changes, I'm sure, but it will never make meaningful change to the majority of people. Because this system is always going to perpetuate in this way. There is some glimmer of hope though, because we're now finding with the changes we're finding now that are coming up, for example, with cryptocurrencies, with alternative currencies, with alternative means of financial support. For example, crowdfunding. There is more and more chance and opportunity, not much at the moment, but that will get better, that will increase, as people start waking up to this ability for them to make meaningful change. For independent politicians to actually get the financial support and backing in order to get to a position to have any kind of influence in politics. And as that increases, as more and more independent politicians are able to get the financial support from the general public via alternative means, rather than relying on support from big corporations and big business, there's a greater chance that they will have more say and that this system will start to be undermined from within, slowly and gradually, which is the safest way of doing it. But that requires people to wake up to this potential. For example, last time there were local elections in my city, in a neighbouring ward, there was a very promising independent candidate who wanted to bring out an alternative currency for the city. He's a great believer in the problems of the monetary system, and he wants to break us out of it. And he's very rich. He's made his money in the system, but that has taught him the problems of the system. And I think he got like 200 and something votes. That was it. Virtually nothing. Because people are ingrained in their head that the only chance to make meaningful change is to vote for one of the two opposing parties. The problem is both those parties are supporters of the system. That's why they're taught, no, don't vote for independents or anybody else. Only vote for one of the two main parties. That's the only way to make any change. And the two parties are the Tory party and the Labour Party. And when you talk about voting for a third party, each one will tell you, you vote for them is effectively voting for our opposition. They all say the same thing. Because it's in their interest to brainwash you into believing that. So that you will only funnel majority of votes to those two parties, so that they will be the ones continuing to get the majority of the financial support, and you don't get to be a political bigwig in those parties unless you understand the system and agree to perpetuate it, or at least not challenge it significantly. And in history, if you look back in the last 200 to 300 years in the Western world, and especially in the 20th century, there are plenty of examples of what happens to political leaders who try to challenge this system. Just look at where wars have occurred, and that will give you the answer. So those who are aware of this know which side of their bread is buttered. And so all of these aspects continue to reinforce and perpetuate this very unfair, very limiting system. And it's limiting in terms of productivity, in progression, in technological advancement. It limits human potential. And that has now been shown scientifically as well, with experiments on workforces depending on how they are paid. And comparing that to increases or decreases in productivity, which shows that if you're working in a system where you get paid more for more productivity, it actually reduces the workforce's overall productivity, the stress and anxiety. When your workforces are paid a living wage, enough money universally to have everything they need for that desired average standard of living, their productivity increases because the stress and anxiety is gone. So I guess I'm doing this video primarily to speak to people in the UK who have local elections coming up. And my advice would be, do not vote for the standard parties, because that vote for the standard parties is effectively a vote for the current system. Try to find independent candidates if you want to vote to support. Smaller parties. Even if those smaller parties aren't their policies aren't everything you would wish to see. The more smaller parties get power. Hi Brenda! Thanks for coming. The more the smaller parties get power, the less the bigger parties have power. The more diverse the voices in the political system, the more broader the conversations become. And the more the big parties will have to start really listening to all this, because their positions are being threatened. So look for independent candidates. Don't vote for the mainstream parties, because all you're doing is continuing the same old system, and the same old system is not really conducive collectively to a nation's health and prosperity. It is designed specifically to support the prosperity of the minority elite alone. And I hear people say, when you talk about depopulations agendas, and they will say, well, that's just ridiculous. You know, they need us. Why would they want to kill us off? And that's true, they do need us. In order to maintain this system, this model, they do need us. They need our labour, they need our compliance. But there is a balance that they need. And there is, as I spoke before, they don't need a constant growth in population, especially these days with robotics and what's going to happen with the workforce. And what they really do not need is a population that is even thinking about these issues, because that to them is very threatening, very dangerous to the system. So the more people wake up to how the system works and the problems and where it all stems from, and if you follow every conspiracy and everything, it all goes back to a central problem, a central nexus, and that is the banking system, the monetary system. That is the spider in the middle of the web. And because everything relies on that, everything. And if you control that, you control all of the other peripheral dependent areas of society, or at least you control the people who control it. And that's where the main issue lies with the monetary system. And that is how they control us. That is how they control entire populations. They control behaviour. Because as long as we believe that we are completely dependent on a monetary system to survive, we will protect it at all costs. So they constantly brainwash people into thinking that if there was no money, it would be chaos. If there was no money, you'd be living in a field in a teepee. If there was no money, there'd be disease rampant. There would be high death rates, blah, 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 blah. And that may have been true hundreds of years ago. The problem is it wouldn't be true now, because the human race in its entirety is not suddenly going to develop amnesia overnight and forget all of the advancements of science and the technological advancements we've achieved. We're not going to forget that. That knowledge is still there. You don't necessarily need money to make a water turbine to power a house. You just need the material objects in order to create it. It's only in the current system that you need money to purchase it. But if money didn't exist, you wouldn't need money to purchase it. So you would still be able to get it. They would still be produced. So it's a myth. It's an absolute myth. And in the title of my video, I've put, for example, indications that I'm going to talk about and link this to consciousness and Mandela effect. And it is all intricately linked into the global awakening, because that's effectively, in large part, what the global awakening is about. When you start learning about this stuff, it changes your emotional and spiritual state, because you can descend into a fear state, or you can bypass that or get out of it quickly and go into a loving state, a state of universal acceptance and love for humanity and all of Gaia. And I know people who are so knowledgeable, who are really well worth listening to. For example, the Richie Allen show. And he poo-poos all of this universal love is going to save the world, blah, blah, blah. And although I understand where he's coming from, I also disagree with it, because to me, it is a vital component of the entire tapestry of what is going to change the world. And it is entirely possible that this concept of universal love and acceptance alone could change the world. Because when you look at the Mandela effect, when you look at what science is coming out, independent, alternative science is coming out and telling us about the nature of our reality, that it is, the nature of our reality is basically the fundamental unit is consciousness, is energy. There is no solid matter at all. So everything is changeable via utilising the connections between the energy. And there are different timelines and different dimensions, and we're flitting between the two, and we, you know, you can talk about why that is and why it's happening, blah blah blah, but the fact remains that reality is mutable, it is changeable by whatever means it's happening, whether it is entirely our consciousness, whether it's our consciousness alongside technology like D-Wave and CERN and the 5G and nano particulates in our brain. I mean, whatever the mechanisms of actions, the fact remains the same. Reality is changing and is changeable. And to me, this is really liberating, because it says to me that it isn't hopeless. Because if we can manifest and change our reality with our thought alone, by whatever means that's occurring, it means that this concept of universal love and positive emotions is very real and very needed and necessary. Because in order to change reality to a more towards a world that employs those emotions. Because this is what you find if you're in a fear and anxiety state, you change the world, your reality collectively, to one that perpetuates those emotions in predominance. If the majority of humanity is in a loving state, you change the world to one that perpetuates those emotions. And that inevitably changes the systems, the politics, the economics that we're living in. And for such a long time, the predominant emotion of the most of humanity has been fear and anxiety, and that is now changing. Slowly, but it is. And this has been prophesied a long time ago by most of the different societies, cultures and religions. This golden age of man, this new age. This age of Aquarius. It's been prophesied to occur, and it is occurring. And I believe in prophecy. I don't really believe in religions. I believe in spirituality, and I believe in prophecy. I myself have many precognition events. Now, is that manifesting? Or is that precognition? And what is the difference between the two? That's another debate. Could both be the same thing. But we do manifest, and we can manifest, and collectively we have a greater ability to manifest than individually. We have a greater sphere of influence collectively than we do individually. So I guess I'm asking viewers that when you're online looking into conspiracies, reading Facebook posts, blah blah blah, and you see all of these negative orientated comments, these comments that are based in fear and anxiety and helplessness and hopelessness, try to do your bit to change that. Put a comment on that might encourage some of the other viewers to just look at things a little bit differently. Instead of feeling hopeless and helpless that they can't change anything, try to encourage them to understand that actually they do have a great amount of power, collectively and individually in their own immediate sphere of reality. I don't necessarily believe that there are evil people running the world. I believe that this is a self-perpetuating, self-feeding feedback loop system that positively selects for certain types of people and mindsets to become prominent within it. It's an organic system that has grown over time and has been, by some, deliberately perpetuated. Doesn't mean they're evil. It just means that, like everybody, primarily they're out for their own self-interest. And if their self-interest is in perpetuating the system, then that's exactly what they're going to do. They have families to feed as well. They have wealth to maintain. They have political reputations to maintain. But things are changing. More and more people can be able to come out of the box and say their true thoughts in the independent media. And the independent media is starting to encroach on the mainstream media now. So we are seeing change. Massive change. Disclosures are occurring more and more and more. And this is going to change the current system. It has to. Because they cannot... at the end of the day, the current system is only perpetuated with our compliance. And they need our compliance. So they will try and maintain that compliance as long as possible, even if that means they have to change some things and areas and of the system to keep up with the changing level of knowledge and awareness of their citizenry. But over time, the longer the citizenry wake up and more become self-aware of the nature of reality and how it works and the systems that we live in and the problems inherent within them, then that is going to change the system overall. It might not be rapid, or it might be rapid. Who knows? But it will happen as long as we continue to talk about it, as long as we continue to share our thoughts and our beliefs. And we continue to talk rationally and stop being divided amongst ourselves. There is always going to be differences of opinions on various issues within the population. That's inevitable. We're humans. We're individual. We're individualistic. The problem is when our focus is on the differences rather than the commonalities. And that's what you see all too often, everywhere. People focus on what is different between me and that person, rather than, okay, I accept there are differences, but what are the commonalities? What do we agree on? We need to start finding what the common agreements are amongst these different diverse groups and bringing those desires into being. And then reanalyzing, okay, what can we next agree on, and bringing those into being. Rather than concentrating on these differences, because that is not going to change anything, because that will continue to perpetuate the same system. Because it perpetuates fear and anxiety, not only of other nations and other cultures, but our own people as well. Our own culture, our own citizens, our neighbours, our friends. So we need to change our mindset. We need to change how we look at things and how we feel about things. And meditation is integral in this. It is very difficult without meditative techniques to be in control of your own emotional state. It's because until you are aware of your emotional state objectively as an observer, you cannot be in control of it because you're not aware of it. And this isn't about burying your emotions or hiding your emotions or putting them in a locked room and throwing away the key, metaphorically. It's about allowing these emotions to go through you, but being aware of what is causing them, and then you can limit their impact on your behaviour, and which limits the effect of your emotional state, not only on your own health, physically and spiritually and emotionally, but also on those around you. So I wanted to keep this video quite short because a good friend of mine, thank you Michele, keeps saying to me, you need to make shorter videos. And I'm not very good at that because I know where my mind works. I start talking about a topic and I'll go off on tangents. And I do find it difficult to do really short videos. So most of my videos are very long. So I would like to start doing more shorter videos for people to listen to, and this is one of them. So anyway, I'm going to end it here before I go off into another topic. And so please like, please share if you liked it, and please remember to subscribe. And later on I will put links in the description to my other channels and to channels of my friends who could also do with your support. And please come back. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Bye.